Okay, good morning and good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of the Foundation for Self-Leadership, I want to welcome all of you to our second panel discussion of the military and IFS. In our first discussion, we talked about what's unique about the military and combat-related post-traumatic stress disorder. That understanding would include the 24/7 nature of military duty and military culture, the training that kind of leads to discouraging vulnerability. It's not like the Brene Brown approach, and the training involved in learning to kill and destroy. Many therapists are not actually familiar with what happens to the individual soldier, and we of course agree that therapists need to understand their clients. We want to get more therapists involved with the military because we respect the importance of the military and the sacrifices that are made by its personnel. And we also think that IFS has something to offer with respect to healing. Today, Sharissa Jackson will share some of her story about what happened to her as a combat nurse, which might just be the most difficult job on the planet. And Jerry Grace, Dr. Grace, will talk about what the military provides in the way of trauma treatment, and Kristen Erner will focus more on what the VA currently offers. We'll then spend some time on what seems to work, what isn't so helpful, and what seems to be missing. About our panel, I think I would say that we're not on the lecture circuit. You probably won't find our names on any PESI brochures, but all of us are experienced frontline workers with regard to combat trauma. We're here hopefully to save you some time by sharing our experiences and to interest you further in this area if it's something you're thinking about. I think you should know something about each of us here on the panel, in particular regarding our military and IFS experiences. So we'll begin with that, then I'll say a couple things about the format of the session, and then we'll go back to Sharisa to get us really started. So I can start in the introductions by saying that I spent 3 years in the Army as a Russian linguist and counterintelligence officer. I'm a clinical psychologist. I worked for the VA in the Vet Center program for 32 years and first ran into Dick Schwartz and IFS in 2001. I started using it almost right away, and it's still my primary psychotherapy modality today, some 20 years later. So Sharisa, you want to say a few words about yourself here, just as an introductory?
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. I'm so honored to be here. My name is Sharissa Jackson. I'm a very proud woman veteran. I completed 23.5 years and 14 days in the military. I am a combat nurse, and I've actually coined the term America's combat nurse because I survived 4 deployments, twice to Iraq and once to Afghanistan. I'm very honored to be here to tell you my story, as there are many stories out here of survivors of PTSD. And I'm so honored also to be here with my colleagues to have this great discussion. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Sharissa. Jerry? Can you
unmute yourself, Jerry?
Sorry, Jerry Grace here. You probably already have gathered I do not hail from South Texas. Came across the pond back in the early 90s and have been deeply embedded in the whole area of psychological trauma, more specifically war zone trauma within the military behavioral health system. Primarily on the training wing for MedCom as we rolled out evidence-based treatments for PTSD. And then more recently in the clinical wing as I headed up the IOP program for Brooke Army Medical Center here. Just retired and I'm now enjoying a much slower pace in my private practice, but glad to reconnect with this culture and with these fine people. I look forward to the next 90 minutes.
Jerry, you want to say anything about IFS?
Yeah, I'm trained level 3, trained in IFS. I was introduced back in the early 90s, like used to IFS. I was just graduating then. I was up to my ears with theory, but I just circled back to IFS about 5 years ago and have landed on IFS as a profound model of healing. And I was able to introduce some of the core concepts into the IOP, which I'll sort of mention a little bit later.
Thanks. And Kristen?
Hi, my name is Kristen Erner, and I am a licensed clinical social worker who works currently at the Vet Center. I've been working with veterans for the last 15 years in the VA system. I am not a veteran myself, I am a civilian, so I am honored to be here with those of you who are veterans and have protected us and served us in that way. In terms of my experience, I practice primarily with the EMDR therapy and integrate some of the basic core concepts of IFS within that. So that is kind of my stance of kind of where I come from. And then, you know, here at the Vet Centers, our eligibility criteria is for those who are combat veterans or deployed to a combat zone or in direct support of combat operations, those who have survived military sexual trauma, and those and offering bereavement and grief services for Gold Star families. So that's a little bit of my background for today. And like Sharisa, I'm honored to be here with all of you.
Thanks, Kristen. And let me say, with regard to format then, the views of the panelists are their own and do not represent an endorsement by the foundation, nor are the panelists, by participating, necessarily endorsing IFS or the mission of the foundation. So I'm hoping that this will be mostly a conversation. And I'm also hoping that all of us will at least aspire to be self-led, you know, which kind of means, like, I don't know where this is going exactly either. We do have a bit of an outline, but it's both a little nerve-wracking, but a great blessing to have discussions like this be self-led. So I'm hoping that you're going to feel free to join the conversation here, ask questions by, at the bottom of your screen, there should be a Q&A block. And if you click on that and just type in whatever your question is, we'll try to get to you. Finally, if you need to step out for a minute, or some you know, something that somebody says might trigger you and you just need to go take a walk and think about it, that's fine. Please know this session is being recorded, so you can come back to it on YouTube later and pick up, you know, wherever you left out if you need to do that. Okay, I think we've taken care of the preliminaries, and Sharissa, you're up.
Awesome. So before I begin, I want to say to most people that are in the veteran service organization space, on Fridays, we wear red. And so I'm not wearing red today because it's Christmas. I'm wearing red because red, RED, stands for Remember Everyone Deployed. And for someone like myself, who was deployed 4 times and I was gone throughout the holidays, this is also a time for me to reflect on my friends who are deployed, some friends that came back with me and some friends that didn't come back with me. So I encourage all of you to, if you don't wear red, this could be an opportunity for you to remember those deployed.
But let me interject. The Marines all think you're wearing red because of the, you know, the Marine Corps. And yeah, let's let them know, like, calm down. You don't have to go buy a red pickup truck.
No. We're not going to get into that argument, Stu, because I believe the Air Force is the best branch. So I will begin by saying I am the current chief medical executive of AMVETS. And for those of you on the call today who don't know what AMVETS is, certainly Google us. We are one of the big 6, one of the 6 big 6 veteran service organizations out here that's congressionally chartered. We have over 250,000 members across the country. We provide resources. We provide any service that a veteran will need in our organization. I'm a little biased because I believe we are the best out of the 6. We do a lot of work compared to most other veteran service organizations because we are the most inclusive. When you get into the details of the other big 6 veteran service organizations, they're not as inclusive as us. And we are hitting topics that most veteran service organizations don't. So we'll get into why I'm here today. I'm here to tell my story. And I'm glad that Stu mentioned about triggers. It may even be triggered in telling my story. But for those of you who hear my story and is triggered, please do as Stu suggested. We want you in a safe space, and we don't want you in harm's way. So my story begins, when I was a 17-year-old and decided I wanted to come into the military. My parents had to sign for me. I knew the military was for me. And I knew when I came into the military, I wanted to be a nurse. And so it wasn't by chance that I have this nature of being a person of service, because I chose the military and I'm currently an active nurse taking care of people, again, a person of service. And so my parents signed for me and I decided to take this journey where it would be. And I initially started off as a logistics officer. I'm on the flight line providing parts to the C-17s and F-15s. And I realized after about 9 years of that, I needed a little bit more to do. I needed something that was going to challenge me. And after I had my twin daughters and I saw how the nurses took care of me, I knew that that was the path I wanted to take. So the Air Force was good to me. They paid for my nursing degree. I became an officer. I got commissioned. And all the while doing all that, I was going through a crazy divorce, financial ruins, and it was the military that got me back on track. But what I didn't know is, the military didn't just invest in me in a nurse because they just loved Sharissa Jackson. They knew they wanted me to be deployed. They knew they needed good nurses out there in the field. So in 2005 was my first time being deployed. The military did not prepare me for what I was going to see on my very first deployment. It was at Balad Air Base. And for those of you who know Balad Air Base, you know what that facility was all about. It was the first site that soldiers came to from the battlefield. And again, we were taught to be great nurses, know what to do when trauma came through the ER doors, knew how to take care of patients, all types of injuries, but no one told us what we were going to see. And I really don't think the military could have told us what we were going to see. So that first deployment was 4 months, almost 5 months. I was in the ICU. Not only did I take care of our soldiers, but I also took care of the insurgents. So imagine taking care of our own soldiers being shot at by the enemy and then having to also take care of the enemy. I mean, you're talking about a challenge. You just, injured one of my soldiers and now I have to give you blood. Now I have to feed you. Now I have to also provide care to you. So that was very challenging for a lot of us. I didn't realize how impactful that deployment was until a year later, in 2006, the military came back again and said, Sharissa, we need you to go back to, again, Balad Air Base. And I knew this time around what I was going to see because I remembered and recalled everything I saw in 2005. I never shared with anyone what I saw in 2005. I never shared with my family, my friends, what I saw in 2006. But I knew in 2006, and I knew the height of war was happening, that what the potential would be. And I tried to prepare myself as best I could, went back to the ICU, went back to being an emergency nurse, saw same injuries, if not worse injuries the second time around. And so I realized that I was a good compartmentalizer. I left war, I thought, in Iraq, and I came back and I took care of my twin daughters in 2006. And then the military was like, hey, Sharissa, you're almost up for retirement. We'll send you to the East Coast. And so they sent me to Andrews Air Force Base, where I thought I was safe, where I thought I could just ride out my retirement. Needless to say, in 2011, the military came again and said, hey, Sharissa, with your skill set, we need you in Kandahar City, of all places in Afghanistan. Realizing what I had seen in 2005, realizing what I had seen in 2006, they thought I was the best candidate to handle what I was going to see in 2011. And I was there for 6 full months in the heat of battle. And it was in 2011 that I almost died in an incident at Kandahar City. It was the enemy that came and we were under attack before I went to night shift, and I thought I was safe. And the next night I went back to work and the enemy had those coordinates and they came back at us again. And I was faced with death. I was faced with crawling to a bunker hoping and praying that I didn't die that night. And because I was an officer, I was responsible for all of the enlisted people below me. And I could hear and see, how scared they were in that bunker, looking to me to ensure that they were going to get out of it when I didn't even know if we were going to get out of that incident. It was very traumatic for me because we could hear the gunfire overhead. I could hear a missile that we thought was going to come through the bunker, but it didn't. And I can smell the smoke of the gunfire when we came out of the bunker. And so I prayed to God that night, just get me through and get me the hell out of Kandahar City. And needless to say, about a month later, in January of 2012, I came home. When I came home again, like I always did in 2005 and 2006, I thought I left war back there. I didn't bring it home. I was coming back home being a stellar mom. They sent me to Walter Reed. I was still taking care of the soldiers coming from the battlefield. I knew this. I knew it like the back of my hand. Nothing could scare me. I was good. I was stoic. I was able to contain my emotions, my feelings, and my trauma. At least I thought. And then I retired in 2013. And when I retired in 2013, no longer had to wear that uniform, no longer had to go to war, no longer had to take care of patients in Walter Reed and other combat hospitals. I thought I was safe. My daughters were going off to college in 2012. And that was when I no longer had to prioritize other people, other things. And it was me having to take care of me, having to just sit with myself, that PTSD reared its ugly head. It was the first time I had ever experienced a PTSD break, is what I call it. And that was when all of the sounds, all of the smells, everything that I had locked away from 2005, 2006, 2011 came back that day. It was the day I moved in my daughters into their dorm rooms. I came home, I sat on the couch, and I was tired, exhausted. And I thought I was drifting off to sleep, but I wasn't. When I woke up from this traumatic event, I was sweating. I was in the corner of my living room. I was in a fetal position, and it was actually my little Shih Tzu dog that broke me out of that episode. And I remembered every single thing that I shouldn't have remembered. I remembered seeing soldiers with 70%, 80% burns. I remember seeing soldiers with 1 amputation, 2 amputations, 3 amputations, and even a soldier, 19 years old, with 4 amputations. When I went to take care of him, because I was the most skilled ICU nurse, I was distraught to see just a torso in the bed. And I would never forget that young man because he was still joyful. And I could not understand why this young man was still happy when he didn't have any limbs. And this young man still is one of my memories I have, because I wonder, where is he now? What's going on with him? Who's taking care of him? And he was joyful because he recalled just knowing that he could breathe and he was alive, because a lot of his comrades and friends didn't make it off of the battlefield. And what people don't know about war is you can't anticipate what's going to happen. I could never, no matter how many Black Hawks, no matter how many planes came in, no matter how many mass casualties we had, I could never say what was going to get off of that plane. I was hopeful that they were alive, but we had cases where I had to identify dead bodies. I had to open body bags to make sure those soldiers did indeed expire. And so all of those things is who I am now. And I didn't know until I sought out for therapy in 2013 after my PTSD break that I indeed had PTSD. I'd been taking care of soldiers with PTSD. I've been passing out the medications to those soldiers with PTSD. I knew what those medications would do to people who had PTSD, all the while knowing I was working every single day with the same diagnosis of PTSD. When I went to my therapist, I sought after treatment myself. I didn't go to my commander. I didn't go to my supervisor. I didn't go to my family and or friends because of the stigma of PTSD. I didn't want people to see me as being weak. I didn't want someone to think I was no longer that stellar nurse that received all of those awards, that could take care of soldiers, that can manage 5, 6, 8 drips, that can resuscitate patients, that can get those IVs that nobody can get. I didn't want that stigma to be on me. So I hid in silence, and I went to therapy and sought after therapy for myself. I recall sitting there in front of the therapist, and he heard my story. I told him the things that I was doing, spending money like crazy, having erratic behavior. And he was like, Sharissa, how can you not have PTSD? It just makes sense. The things that you saw, the things that you're doing now just make sense. And so I accepted that diagnosis that day, even though I knew in the back of my mind I had it. I finally accepted it when a therapist told me that I had it. And so then I asked, what's my plan of care? What are you gonna do for me? I know what doctors do to patients at Walter Reed. I know what doctors do to patients in hospitals. And he of course, wrote those same scripts that most patients get. And he immediately put me in the same box that most patients are put in, with the same medications, same treatment options, without even asking, Sharissa, what do you need? What will work best for you? And so I went along with the regimen for a year because I knew I had to start somewhere. And then I realized that it was not a good suit for me. It was not a good fit. I didn't like the feeling of the medications. I just didn't. And I wanted to be myself, my happy-go-lucky, jovial self, even though my new self is a new self. And I had to understand that Sharissa before 2005 was no longer that Sharissa. I was a new person that had to adapt to my challenges the best way that I know I could. And so I came off as a nurse. I titrated my meds, came off my meds, and I found out other alternatives, other holistic treatments that worked for me. I horn in on my spirituality. As a Baptist, my parents raised us in the church. So I went back to meditation, my spirituality, and then I discovered how good training for a marathon was. I trained for a half marathon, and I cannot tell you how it felt to just running and preparing and sweating. It was like I was sweating out all of the anger, all of the fear, all of the symptoms that I was having as I was training for that marathon. And when I finished that marathon, I crossed that finish line and I got that little blue Tiffany bag with my badge in it. I felt like I had conquered the world, and then I was cured and I was good to go. But again, PTSD stays with you. It is not something you can just erase from your life. And so I've been on this journey, educating folks about how to deal with their own PTSD. And one of the first things I did do is I created a nonprofit called PTS Faces. I wanted folks to know there's many different faces to PTSD. When most folks would see me out here on the speaker circuit, they will always come to me and say, you don't look like someone who has PTSD. Well, what the hell does that mean? And that would be my response to everybody. What the hell does that mean that I don't look like someone who has PTSD? Because now you are buying into that stigma that these soldiers are trying to combat because you're not allowing them to be themselves. And so I've been on this journey to educate the community, educate parents, families, even veterans about standing in and sitting in their own PTSD and finding those solutions, finding those treatment options that work for them. I then decided, maybe my story, maybe my journey can help other people. And so I wrote a book called At Peace, P-E-A-C-E, Not in Pieces. Because again, I wanted folks to know you can still be whole. You don't have to be broken just because you have PTSD. You don't have to be broken in pieces, but you can find peace in your diagnosis. And so my charge to psychologists, my charge to therapists, my charge to anyone that's helping soldiers, community workers, anybody that's dealing with PTSD is to not put all of us in a box. Listen to us, hear what we're saying, and find that treatment option that is individualized for us. I believe that's the best way to go about it. There's so many resources, there's so many treatment out here that I believe if someone listened, that they can find what fits for every single person. So I hope my story is a story that can empower others, that it will inspire others, that it will showcase to people that you can rebound from a PTSD diagnosis. It will stay with me for life. it does impact everyone besides the soldier. It impacted my daughters. It impacted my family. And it wasn't until I came out and said to the world in Prevention Magazine that I had PTSD that my family was like, aha, now I know. Now that makes sense. And all the while I thought I was disguising it. I thought I was able to compartmentalize it and try and be Sharisa before 2005. It was my family that saw the changes, but we didn't discuss it. They didn't come to me and ask, well, why did you do that? Why aren't you socializing? Why aren't you going to the gym? You're a gym rat. Why aren't you doing that anymore? Why aren't you talking on the phone? They didn't come to me and I didn't want to go to them. I thought my daughters couldn't handle it. But it was when my daughters said, when they came back home from college, that Mom, it makes sense. We recall a day when you wouldn't let us out the house to go to school because you thought that the Iraqis were outside and they were going to get us. You wouldn't let us outside, Ma. You wouldn't let us go to school. And they had to snap me out of that image. They had to snap me out of that episode so that they could go to school. And all the while, them not asking me, Mom, what's going on, and me not expressing to them what I was dealing with. So I have to carry that with me for the rest of my life. That impacted my daughters. They're now 27, but there's times when they can still to this day say, man, Mom, do you remember you did this? And thank God we're doing well. Thank God that they're doing well. But just know this diagnosis does not just impact the veteran. It impacts the whole family. It impacts the whole community. And we as a community can do this together and provide the resources, provide the help that these soldiers need. Last but not least, I want every person on this podcast, this webinar, to know that it's okay to not be okay. I wish someone had told me that it was okay to be sad, to be depressed. It's okay to not want to get up. It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to say today is not a good day. And to say, Sharisa, you don't have to say you're okay because you're not. I wish someone had told me that years ago. So I say to each and every one of you, be okay sitting in not being okay. And when you can't, then seek the help that you need. And these esteemed colleagues here are people that can help. And I'm sure we're going to continue to talk about what's out here to provide that help to each and every one of you. If you want to reach out to me, I'm here to offer support. I'm here to inspire, motivate, and encourage. You can certainly find me at AMVETS. And again, it's okay to not be okay.
Wow. So it's easy to see why people love Sharissa Jackson. Thank you so much.
You're so sweet. Thank you.
And I think that your story illustrates some things too. One of which is the importance of telling your story. You know, and you were saying after 2005 and 6, you really didn't share it with anybody, that it was something that you felt like you had to keep inside. You know, I'm curious about that. And I'm also thinking about, I don't remember his name right now. One of our senators, a triple amputee. He was a senator. He's not currently from Georgia. Triple amputee from Vietnam. And he wrote a book called Strong in the Broken Places. And I don't know, your story kind of reminds me of that too. It's a very good book. And he also emphasizes the importance of telling your story and taking something that was a horrible experience and making it into something that's inspirational for everybody. So
and I agree with that, Stu. I agree with that, Stu, because I went to war in 2005 and I didn't start telling my story until 2013. Wow. So that's how many years that I held it in and tried to, resume who I was before I left for war. Thought I was doing a really great job at it. I thought I disguised it well. But I would say that it was hard for me to tell my story because I didn't know who to tell. I didn't know who to tell that could
understand
help
it or right.
Yeah. If I went to my daughters, what were my daughters going to say? If I went to my family, what was my family going to say? If I went to my supervisor, I saw how many nurses came back, Stu, and they couldn't cope. These nurses came back and went right into their supervisor's office and the commander's office. It's like, I can't take care of another soldier. I can't do it. And I saw them move them from the ICU into something administrative. And those nurses have never touched a patient since. That is not what I wanted for myself. So again, who was I supposed to tell?
Well, the other thing about that is it's at least been my experience that nurses and doctors are the hardest ones to reach out to and have them respond and ask for some help themselves. All of them are superheroes, they think. You know, and by the way, did you win the marathon, Sharisa?
You know, I didn't win the marathon. I crossed that finish line because I knew that blue Tiffany box was waiting for me. So I didn't care if I crawled across that finish line. I was getting that blue Tiffany box.
Okay, all right. By the way, so Sharisa has to leave us a little early. And if you've got something that you specifically want to ask her, try to get it in sometime in the next half hour. So thanks again. And Jerry, you ready to follow that?
Wow, how do I follow that?
Sorry.
Well, firstly, Sharisa, it's amazing to think of, as I'm hearing your story and listening to you, I'm also juxtaposing a uncle of mine that was very dear to me that was buried about 2 years ago back in London. And this is all within our lifetime, right? And here we have you with your articulate ability to find words, to bring some coherence to incredible complexity that sort of finds roots in here and that grows incessantly, but in very subtle ways over years. And I've always thought of it like this PTSD thing, it's especially in combat, it's almost like there's an incubation period, like years. And it's subtle as it's taking over. And yeah, so as I'm juxtaposing your ability to sit here today after OIF, OEF, and tell your story with such courage, with such insight, with such clarity. And then I'm thinking of my uncle that was in the Royal Navy, and he was bound by the Germans and lost at sea for 3 days.
Oh, wow.
And nobody has access to his story apart from the cuttings of the newspaper from that time. I spent many a night with him in his local, and thinking that, like, with good single malt, with the lubrication of that usually might give access to these types of memories and openness and flexibility, we could never touch the edge of that for him. And he took it to the grave with him. I'm also thinking, in my role initially when I came to the US, I was a hospice chaplain. And I was called to the bedside of a Second World War victim, and who was in his 90s. And the nurses were saying, he's dying, he's in the final stages of death, but we cannot get him calm. So can you come and sit with him? So I went to his bedside, and he clearly was dying, but he was having flashbacks. Nobody knew what he was having, but he was having flashbacks for more, and they were active flashbacks. And the morphine, the sedatives, the anxiolytics could not touch the edge of his restlessness, of his agitation. For those of you who are familiar with the dying process or have worked with that, there's a phenomenon that we call terminal restlessness, which is very, very common, right, in the dying person. But when there's trauma that has been suppressed, there's a direct correlation between the level of suppression of the trauma and the intensity of the terminal restlessness at death. So it's so nice so you are here today telling your story. so you don't take this to your deathbed with you.
Great point.
And how many of our forebears that did not have this opportunity?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that, Gary. And I've also had friends who were deployed with me in 2005 and 2006 and 2011 who've taken their lives because they didn't know how to cope with their PTSD. So I can only imagine, what they took to their graves. And I'm just grateful and thankful that I knew, because I was a nurse, that there was help out there. But imagine those soldiers, those people in the community, even right now, it doesn't have to be combat trauma, just any trauma that is just simply trying to cope when all they really want to do, Stu and Gary, is they just want the pain to go away. I mean, I've been in that dark place where I didn't want to take my life because I wanted to die. I wanted to just get those memories gone. I just wanted the pain to go away. And so there's so many people out here. There's so many soldiers that I've lost who definitely have taken their stories to the grave. So thank you so much for that, Gary. This is the first time in almost 2 years that I've told my story, because I had to take a break from it. When I wrote the book and people realized who I was and what I was doing, and I call it the Chitlin circuit of speaking. I was on the Chitlin circuit and speaking everywhere and going to West Point and going to Harvard and going all these places, hoping to inspire, motivate, and encourage, which I did. But again, I didn't have the tool to be able to say, okay, you're rehashing, you're bringing these things back up, you're triggering yourself. So I had to certainly do my own work. And one of the things I had to do is pull back from telling my story. So this is the first time I've told it in a different way. I had to figure out what was a good way where it was healthy for me. And I had to figure that out, because initially I didn't know what to say, how to say it. And I was getting myself deeper and deeper into the trenches, where it was so incapacitating when I got off stage. And I was just like, I just need to take a week to just regroup. And so now I've figured out a way where I don't have to be so detailed, and able to tell my story safely for me, and still be able to inspire, motivate, and encourage. So in a better place, when you live and you learn, you do better. That's what I'm doing right now. But I totally agree with you, Gary. There's so many people out here whose stories will never be told, and hopefully they see some insight into what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's interesting in that as therapists, we gotta, I think, realize that we're going to have a lot of clients that are going to be pretty distrustful and pretty skeptical that we're going to be able to understand them. So that's one reason for them holding back. And the other one is, like, it hurts to, I don't know, re-trigger or to tell the story sometimes. And it's a very healthy, helpful thing to do if it's received appropriately, and if it somehow helps you open the doors to your heart. But it's not easy. I agree totally with what Jerry's saying. It's very tough, to figure out how in the world you're even going to tell the story. Some of it doesn't make sense, and some of it's painful.
Absolutely. And Sharisa, there are some questions that are kind of specific in the chat, in the Q&A, kind of about how you would recommend that people do tell their story. Would this be something ideally built into the military for you coming home, right, after you've been deployed?
Yeah.
And a question here about, knowing that you know what you know now, how do you open a conversation with others and your children, like, about yourself in a way to build a safe and healing space and still be mom? So those are some of those questions.
Yeah, and if I can answer really quickly, because I know I'll be jumping off of here. So I didn't debrief when I got back. What the military did was they gave us a little questionnaire and said, check these boxes. Tell us if you're experiencing any type of PTSD symptoms. Again, most people will lie. I did. And I checked no, 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 no. So no one knew what I was experiencing. So there was no said program back in 2005 or 2006 or even 2011 that said, Sharisa, you're showing some signs, or, hey, let's sit down and talk for a little bit because maybe you don't realize. So there weren't any programs out there for me to debrief. As far as talking to your family and talking to kids, you just got to be a little sensitive. You know, I didn't just sit my girls down and say, let me tell you what happened in 2005. Okay, this is what I saw. This is what was going on. I had to find out how to tell my story in a way where it didn't trigger me. And my God, I didn't want to trigger them either. So it's one of those things where you just got to figure out what they need to know. And even now, my kids don't know everything. You guys don't know everything. The world will never know anything. So you find what's essential and what's necessary to tell so people can understand you. And then you move forward from that. But no one is in my brain. No one knows what I remember. So why even try and express that or tell anyone that? So I would say just find what's necessary to tell so people can understand you, and then continue to do the work and be better and be the best person you can be.
So, Jerry, did you want to say some stuff about what is available in the military these days?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, that's because we heard from Larry the last webinar that things did not change from Second World War very much to Vietnam. I mean, basically, it was the same terrain with no resources. Where these memories and these events had to be silenced, had to be exiled, had to be buried, all in the service of moving on with life, putting the past in the past. And we've seen the cost of that. We've seen the cost of that. So in my initial work then with the military back in 2005, right at that time, Sharissa, that you're talking about the surge, right? When you're deploying,
Mm-hmm.
That's when the Office of the Surgeon General was collating data, and it was extremely worrying data that was being collected about the state of affairs regarding the onslaught of trauma coming back from OEF, and the lack of resources to meet the capacity was a huge gap. So there was not enough behavioral health providers. Those that were in the system, there was no training on any sort of combat trauma treatments. There was no resources there for that. It was basically a very pharmacologically driven system, whereby the psychiatrists were just prescribing. So Medcom then they issued an op order, and my little department were tasked under that op order to go and find the tier 1 top level evidence-based treatments for PTSD and get training rolled out to every psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker, nurse case manager in the Army. So we went and we did our literature review, and this is 2006. So there was 2 protocols that actually met the gold standard of enough random clinical trials to meet the threshold of evidence-based treatment. There was prolonged exposure from Edna Foa in UPenn and a cognitive processing therapy from Paddy Resick. So we fought to get EMDR included because I knew that the British Armed Forces were exclusively using EMDR for their returning troops with some success. I also had known from the troubles in Northern Ireland that EMDR was used exclusively as a way to intervene for the psychological trauma coming out of Northern Ireland. So we actually did get EMDR included, even though it was lacking the number of clinical trials. It's now there. It's now up there. So basically, we have 3 modalities, and every provider today is trained in at least one of those modalities. So that's where they're at in terms of individual treatment. But there's also many programs and many tiers and levels of care. that probably you would have available to you today, Sharissa, if you were in the system today. So there's intensive outpatient programs, there's trauma focused programs, there's suicide programs, there's substance abuse programs, and there's evidence-based treatments for PTSD, for depression, for anxiety, for insomnia, for suicide. So there's a plethora now of what we call EBTs out there for psychological conditions. However,
Jerry, can I ask you, is that a mandated treatment within the military system? Is it mandated, in other words, that one of those 3 approved treatments be used? Or
it's mandated that every behavioral health provider would be trained in at least one. It is the extent of the mandate. It's a soft mandate. It's not policed yet, but it is strongly recommended that there be some evidence in the documentation that there is an evidence-based approach being used for whatever condition is being identified as the diagnosis. Mandating, probably it's not gone to that hard mandate yet.
And I would say that that's similar in the VA system as well, because the VA and the DoD have been working kind of closely together to kind of do these rollouts, as we call it, right? The training of providers in certain therapeutic modalities, equivalent to what you're doing, although it took the VA a little longer to recognize EMDR as one of those modalities for treating PTSD. But it is recognized now, but it's not part of the VA specific rollout training program where the VA trains their people. You have to get that outside of the VA system. But we kind of match in terms of, the level of care and the types of care that you're talking about with what the VA offers. And the same in terms of mandating, similarly. There's not that kind of thing, but it's very, very strongly recommended. And the PTSD focused treatment programs are using, prolonged exposure and CPT primarily most places, although EMDR is also offered around the country for that as well. But I would say that our process is very similar to your process in the VA system at large. In the vet centers, we're a little different in that we are part of the VA system, but we're kind of a little branch, speaking to what you were talking about, Jerry, earlier in terms of coming back from Vietnam, and the vet centers, kind of grew from that place where veterans didn't find what they needed at the VA. They didn't find what, the treatment that they wanted. So the vet centers were kind of created more as a peer model at that time. All that's grown and changed now, where we offer the similar kind of treatments. But it's not in the same way that, the mandates that you're speaking of. But I find the parallels between us, very closely. And then there's, some of the exceptions where things that are not included within those parameters, like IFS, I think, is one of those that is not seen within that same level of evidence-based treatment, simply because we look for the RCTs as the gold standard, which, like you were mentioning, EMDR took a while to get to that place, so they could be viewed in that way within these systems, where IFS has not yet come to that place. And that could be, problematic. Sharissa, you were talking about other things that you can do to help treat PTSD, depression, anxiety, etc., that aren't going to meet those criteria because they're not in RCTs, they're not studied in that way, right? Or at least they don't have enough of that evidence yet. Let me put it that way. There are studies that are out there that are building upon that. You talked about your spirituality, exercise, meditation, those kinds of things, that I think we think now are part of a complete package of treatment.
Yeah.
And like you were saying, basing that on what you need, you want, will be helpful for you, versus I think this is where it can be a struggle, maybe, within the VA, maybe Jerry and DoD too, is PTSD treatment is PE or CPT, and you have 14 sessions of this, go.
Yep.
And you should be cured by then. Mm-hmm. Which in your experience, you're like, not exactly.
Not exactly at all. And I'm glad you brought that up, Kristen, because for me, I didn't like talk therapy. I'm like, why do I want to talk through what I experienced? Because all it's going to do is be a trigger for me. And then you're going to give me some Ambien, go to sleep because I can't sleep because now I'm having flashbacks. So it's like these things kept compiling. It was like a domino effect and it was cyclical. And I was just like, just stop, let me figure this out and let me tell you what works for me. Talking about this and what I saw, what I smelled, my nightmares doesn't work. It's not helping me. I'm not getting anywhere. So it wasn't until I discovered RTM, which is a new protocol. Montel Williams actually talked to me about it. He uses it. It's actually being done at Walter Reed right now, where it's talk therapy without actually having to talk about the experience. And so for me, having to recall the before and sitting in the good and the good visuals and the good smells and the good psychological aspect before the trauma is what has helped me. Because so when I do have a trigger and I do have something that takes me back there, I then recall the good instead of recalling the bad. So therefore, I may have a little tremor because of this of the trigger, and I may be stunned a little bit. And I get it here sometimes here at the house. I live out here on the Chesapeake Bay, and we have helicopters go over. And when I hear the helicopters, I'll get stunned for a little bit, but instead of just being stunned and standing and being scared and frightened, I'm able to be stunned for a second and say, that's a helicopter. And I not think about, are they bringing in troops? How many, is that a mass casualty like I was? So I discovered for myself that talk therapy didn't work. I couldn't talk about the experience because it only triggered me. And then I ended up taking the antipsychotics, antidepressants, the insomnia medication, so I can figure out how to still live every day, which wasn't a good fit for me.
So I think that's a really good point. And it seems as though when we bring these protocols out of the sterility of the research labs that they were incubated in and embed them in real life situations, they don't have as near a robustness as the data is saying from the sterile labs.
Yeah.
Because the complexities are all controlled for in the sterility of the labs.
Yep.
Right? You don't have commands requirements. You don't have all of the complexities within a military behavioral health system that has to be engaged and dealt with. And so my sense is that that we're about to turn a new corner here in what we are seeing as what's working and what's not working. And where are the gaps? Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot more awareness today of what you're describing, Sharissa, that it is not a cookie cutter approach. That can never work. And using just two models in the protocols exactly as they're written actually can become more of a straitjacket for the therapist, and of very little avail to the client, to the patient, to the service member. So a study by Charles Hogue from Walter Reed, you may know him, the psychiatrist, a intensive meta-analysis, extensive meta-analysis that actually looked at the efficacy of these rollouts of CPT and PE. And he found exactly that these were not near as robust as the initial data was suggesting. So he found that 50% of those who completed treatment with PE or CPT actually had clinically significant improvement. But about 50% dropped out. So now you have about a 25% sort of success rate. That's not as robust as the original thinking was that got these programs rolled out. So that's a very, very sobering. And it's also extremely hopeful from my perspective, that this is opening up the window but we need to get a lot more creative and a lot more flexible in how we are conceptualizing trauma, conceptualizing PTSD, in how we are identifying core therapeutic processes that would have the widest applicability to the range of suffering that comes with trauma. So that we're not just targeting depression, we're not just targeting hypervigilance, we're not just targeting anxiety, we're not just targeting sleep. Are there processes here that can target all of these problems in living? And we're finding that there are. There are core processes. And IFS is coming in here with tremendous potential to be one of those bullets that's very precise, but with capacity for a wide range of to target a wide range of problems.
And I like that, Jerry, that talking about broadening that out, because I think one of the things that we haven't talked about that can be something to be thinking about is what are we missing in terms of what people are experiencing problems with. And Sharissa, you mentioned that. I know you have to go here in just a second, but just to kind of piggyback a little bit on kind of you're saying you went to your spirituality, and I think that is something that the system misses. And a component that we haven't talked about yet here today is this component of this this idea of moral injury, which is not PTSD. It's not that diagnostic piece of PTSD, and I think that is another miss that we can do, where we could be inviting additional work with understanding, and that could be where IFS could also be part of that, kind of understanding that the part that holds that injury is probably likely exiled pretty well, and other parts are going to be showing up front and center, so to speak, so that the shame and guilt and all of that comes with that, it's pretty well hidden, and we've got to be open and hearing that. And so that, I think that's where IFS can also be part of that, even in our system, where we can, in the flexibility that we still have to bring in some of these. So I just wanted to thank you for bringing that piece of it too. And I know that you've got to jump off here, so I'll let you say some last few words here.
No, I wanted to say that I'm glad to know that IFS offers this, because I'm going to tell you, being in the VSO space, hearing veterans call my HEAL program, looking for help, looking for resources, saying, I've tried this, Sharissa, I've tried this, I've tried that, and they're feeling hopeless out here. And it's time for us as a community, not just the VA, not just the DOD, to hear the cries of the veterans who are tired and are feeling hopeless. So if this system is not working, we have a duty to find something that does work. And if it means going outside the box, if it means doing something totally different, I don't understand why that can't be. Because at the end of the day, even on this call right now, 22 veterans are still taking their lives today. So if we're not breaking into that and figuring that out and figuring out what we need to change, what we need to add, what we need to offer, we're still losing this battle. And so at the end of the day, if IFS is something that can expand the capacity to be able to help and provide resources and a treatment option for veterans, I say, let's do it, because what's working right now isn't working. We're losing veterans every single day. And Congress is asking, what can we do? What do we need to do? And if this is an answer, we need to pivot to something else that can work, because we put our lives on the line. Now, I don't know where I'm gonna be next month. I don't know where I'm gonna be next year. But if I know that a current system is not working and I'm still hurting and I'm still feeling hopeless, and the best way to get rid of my pain is to not be here, that's what I'm gonna do. So how do you save me?
I'm thinking, Sharissa, we'll probably talk a good bit about this with the next session too, because that's kind of the whole focus of the number 3 panel discussion, and I'm hoping that we might spend a few more minutes on this today too. Plus, I know Chris you're thinking about maybe get back a little more to the moral injury question. And is there anything else, Sharisa, that you might want to say here before I know you got something you got to go do? Probably
Yeah,
run a
no.
marathon or.
No, I'm too old for that now, Stu. I'm 50. I turned 50 this year. My knees can't do a marathon again. No,
No.
I may walk it, but I'm not going to run it. But no, I would just like to say to each and every one of you guys, happy holidays. Please be safe out here. I am a nurse first and foremost. So I'm going to tell you to be safe. COVID is still out here alive and well. We're still losing people to COVID. Please pray for our soldiers that are deployed. Please think of them. If you see a soldier out in the community, we're tired of hearing thank you for your service. Don't say that to me no more. Please ask me if I need help. You would get a different response from a veteran if you see them in uniform, or if you hear someone say, I'm a veteran, and instead of saying to us, thank you for our service, ask us, is there anything we can do for you? And you will allow us to be open to the fact that you're not being cliche in saying what most people say, but you are really concerned about us and you really want to be there to help us. So I will offer that as a recommendation to all of you guys. As I say, again, happy holidays. God bless you. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here at the conversation. Thank you to all of my peers. Continue the great work that you're doing. If there's anything I can do for anyone out here, please reach out to me at cjackson@amvets.org.
Thanks for being with us. You're still saving lives.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Sharissa, thanks.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. So let's see. You know, I guess I wanted to at least throw in that my understanding, or Kristen, maybe you could answer this better. What are the regs currently with regard to what, let's say, an individual vet center provider can offer? And, you know, we had the question there about, you know, can we provide complementary or adjunctive integrated type services, or to what extent does this, I don't know, it's not exactly a mandate, but there is some pressure to provide certain kinds of therapies. How
Yes,
strict
I
is
would
that?
say within the vet center system currently, not as strict as the VA system. We have a little bit more of an opportunity to do things differently, and that's kind of what the vet centers offer, are different approaches, so that you know, we can offer, you know, community-based engagements. We can partner with community partnerships, you know, so if it's in a spiritual realm, you know, perhaps bring in somebody's, you know, spiritual provider if that's necessary, kind of being out in the community with people, engaging in that way, and bringing in all these different aspects within the vet center system. Within the VA system, it's a little bit more prescribed in the way that Jerry was talking. In terms of those RCT-based, evidence-based treatments for particular diagnostic categories, I would say it's a little bit more narrow and a little bit more pressure to be in those systems versus what we can do here at the vet center. So we have a little bit a longer leash, shall we say, which is very nice and can be very, you know, successful for veterans. So to the question about can somebody within the system, you know, bring in IFS-based, you know, theories within our system? Yes. Within the VA system, I don't know. That would be an individual provider's perspective, and certainly would be something that you could do in an individual session with somebody. It's not currently within the VA system as an EBP, right? An evidence-based practice or an evidence-based treatment. So, you know, and then there's also the saying in our system, if you've been to one VA, you've been to one VA. And so different VAs can kind of focus down on things differently than others within those parameters. So, you know, that can be a little challenging for providers in our system. And, you know, something that I would hope that those of you out there kind of be thinking about in terms of what works in an individual treatment, like Sharissa was saying, and finding that for each individual veteran, because I think there is a lot that we miss.
Right. So I don't know, Jerry, maybe you have a take on this too. But I mean, my understanding is certainly in the vet center system, if you're an IFS-oriented therapist, let's say, you're free to provide that orientation of treatment. Nobody's going to tell you, no, you can't do that. On the other hand, you got to realize that the VA and the military are both up against, okay, what does work? What does make sense? If somebody's idea of treatment is drink more orange juice, we're not necessarily endorsing that. There's limits here, and the VA, and believe me, like over the years I was involved with the Vet Center program, I couldn't believe how many different kinds of ideas were presented to me as something that they wanted to provide within our setting. And most of the time I had to say, no, we're not going to do that. On the other hand, there's new things coming up all the time. I know when I was first introduced to equine therapy, I thought, oh my goodness, what next? Like pretty soon. And then I heard, well, I won't go into that. I heard some stuff on NPR that about a therapy parrot that this guy in Denver carried around, and it could tell before he knew that he was starting to get tense and tight, and the bird would yell at him, relax, and I thought, oh my God, now where are we going now? I'm just saying, so the VA has to have some limits on what is going to be provided. They want to be helpful as well, and they've got some different considerations that an individual therapist might have. Having said all that, it's really important to get down to what actually works.
Well, I think I would, Stu, if it's okay, I would like maybe in a moment to circle back to Kirsten, the moral injury. I don't want to lose that. So if we
Great, let's do it.
If we can tag that. And prior to going there, just to conclude my thought on Hoag's meta-analysis that speaks to the question you're asking now, Stu, regarding the mandate within the systems. So Hoag is suggesting, and Hoag is a very influential character in terms of influencing policy. So his recommendation is that, can we move away from the straitjacket approach to protocolish treatments? And can we begin to identify core processes and components that we know are effective? For example, we know that the therapeutic rapport and relationship is going to be the foundation.
Yeah.
That if that's not there, no bag of tricks with any protocol is going to be of effect. So therapeutic relationship is number one. Rapport, trust. With trauma, then we know that narrative, some form of narrative, is going to be essential in a healing process. And we know that with trauma, that some opening up of access to primary emotion and vulnerability is going to be a core component. So that's an experiential approach to therapy. And if we can be loyal to those components and work with them in an experiential way in the moment, we know that it produces very, very good results. And my sense is that we're moving much more in that direction now. There's permission, because there's so much not working, and there's so much dropout from some of these more traditional approaches to treatment. And they're not hitting some of the complexities that, Kirsten, you were referring to as moral injury. And I'd be really interested to hear from your perspective from the VA side of the house, what are you finding there in that whole phenomenon we're calling moral injury? What are you seeing or finding there?
Well, I think, one of the things that I'll speak to in terms of my experience and findings is there are different components to even how we define that. So for someone, something that might be what we label morally injurious is an experience that might be different for me than it is for you, than it is for Stu. There can be the piece that is what we would label, kind of perpetration type moral injury. So, in combat, your job, or many of the jobs, especially those, who are at combat arms and 11 Bravos, those kinds of things, are out there to take on the mission of killing enemy people. So you may have been brought up as a young person that killing is bad, it's wrong, you know, that's on the wrong side of your spiritual belief systems, and yet you're asked to do this. That could be a morally injurious event for you. On the flip side, you may see things that don't fit with your moral compass, and that you either witnessed that and had no ability to stop, or perhaps could have stopped and felt you needed to and did not, can also be experienced that way. In the military, I find also there is a large component of betrayal that can be even the most difficult for people if they felt betrayed by either their command structure, their fellow service members. And that could be, you know, in the sense of, well, in lots of different senses, but one that we haven't really talked about that I don't want us to forget is that, you know, those who experience military sexual trauma is a huge betrayal. So not only is there the physical trauma of whatever that meant for you, however you experienced that, but then there's the betrayal of someone, oftentimes, you know, another service member or somebody within the system who you felt that you could trust, that could have your back, you know, that you would hope that you could trust your life to, has injured you in that way. That's one component of that, a betrayal. But then, you know, on the combat side, there could be that betrayal of bad decision making from commanders and other structures, or the other system. And one that we don't talk about very much is friendly fire incidents, right? So we have, you know, inadvertently killed some of our own. You know, people would kind of recognize, you know, if we've been in combat and we've inadvertently killed, you know, what we call non-combatants, civilians, children is a huge component for a lot of people of having to do so or have done so accidentally, of having that as a problem. And when we look at the two main treatments, and I'm trained in all of them, prolonged exposure, cognitive processing therapy, EMDR, that the two main ones through the VA and the DoD that you were talking about, those early trials, don't recognize that specifically, right? They don't say that, oh, there's these things that you may have done.
Those scenarios that you have just described there, all of those scenarios, I mean, that's it. Yeah, that's really helpful, because no, you're right. Those scenarios are not captured within the lens of these cognitive behavioral therapies,
right,
that were created for trauma, but very much focused on the fear driven and the fear mechanism.
Absolutely.
This is not a fear mechanism that's activated here in the scenarios you're describing. It's primarily around guilt, around shame, and around loss and grief. And
absolutely.
we do not do grief well in our culture. And
no,
we
do
not do grief well in our military.
We very much don't do that, which could be also part of, if we consider that as part of the morally injurious event, is if I have witnessed, been part of, seen my buddy killed, and I don't have time to process that. I'm out in the field. There's no time for that. There's no time coming back. I think Sharissa kind of, you know, without saying it directly, was saying, you know, there was no time for that. I had to come back. I'm treating service members. I go back. I'm fine. I just do what I do. There's no time in there. And, you know, this phenomenon of it coming back years and years later, I think is when, Jerry, what you're talking about, that sense of grief, that sense of loss, all of that starts to show up. But it's hard to access. And I think that those treatments that, you know, that are kind of the primary treatments for PTSD, it's not even part of the lens. There's now becoming more of a discussion around that. So they're looking to do some more research around that. I know they're looking to research ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy for moral injury. I mean, there's some of that that's starting to come out. Again, that may, you know, come into another manualized treatment modality, you know, but at the same time, at least there's some conversation about it. But the experiencing of that, and certainly like from the IFS lens of, you know, being able to get to what's exiled around that, because it's very, very difficult for someone to come in and tell somebody, I killed somebody, right? I killed a child, or I didn't stop somebody from doing so, or I accidentally killed one of our own, or any of the other ones that are really, pretty difficult for them to say. It's hard to get to. And I would say from a therapist standpoint, for those of you out there, if that's not something you've been talking about to people regularly, we've got to, as therapists, be able to hear that, right? And be able to sit with that and with those people who are experiencing that and saying that to us. That's a major challenge as well.
Yeah, and it typically doesn't get covered at all in any training program. It's ignored in the DSM-5 and it's ignored in training. And you don't have to be working very long in this field before you're going to hear all kinds of stories about that.
Yeah.
And the tendency, I think, on the part of, therapists, for the most part, are pretty idealistic. And it is hard for us to hear about kind of the worst things that can happen, as a human being. And it's almost like, I know myself, there's a tendency to want to just push that away. And so I've kind of got to get past that part of myself to be able to really listen in any kind of compassionate way and have some idea about how to respond to this.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I'm afraid the client's going to feel even worse about having brought it up, and it's as you said, it's tremendously difficult for them to speak about these things anyway.
Mm-hmm. And it often takes quite a while. So Jerry, to speak to what you're saying that I wholeheartedly agree with is the relationship that you build in whatever alphabet therapy that we do. It's the relationship that we come back to, because we've been working with people for years, and they finally get to the place where they can feel like they trust the process. They trust you to come out and say, this is my deepest held shame-based thing, right? And being able to come to that.
I can't help adding on to that one of the things that I think is a bit unique about IFS that I've really appreciated is we're also talking about the relationship within. So what we find out in a pretty big hurry is that there's a distrust within as well. Mm-hmm. So that if the war beast gets loose, for instance, there's no telling what he's going to do or who's going to be able to talk to him or be with him or get that beast to settle down. And the beast part may hurt or kill somebody. So there's not that trust within the system. And we spend a lot of time developing that. And also, I thought, it was more towards the point that Sharissa was making. We don't want the exile to be alone, with whatever it's doing. We're trying to get the self involved with it so that there's the feeling internally is that you're coming from a resourced place, which is what she said. Mm-hmm. You're not letting the part take over, blend, and then overwhelm. So I don't know. I guess we'll talk more about this maybe next time too. But IFS does have a provision for this that's kind of unique.
Well, you're speaking also to the therapist, and Kirsten, to your point. As a therapist, my product is myself. That's my product. That's what I bring. And we are operating within a system of care that is tremendously burdensome for the selves of therapists. And that has got to be accounted for in the equation of efficacy. The burnout rate, the fatigue rate, the empathic exhaustion rate is tremendously high. And there's a blind eye turned to that. So the machine just keeps turning and turning and turning, but the therapists are as tired as the service members. And
absolutely.
It's not being addressed.
Absolutely. And then that's a nice point, because if we think about it similarly to military terms, the therapists are, frontline, boots in the ground, they're in the trenches.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that
absorbing incredibly traumatic stories day after day.
absolutely. And that, kind of in this idea of, the morally injurious aspect, therapists experience that as well. Right. And I think it can be, important for us to recognize that for ourselves, that we come up to these things too. Right. That, hearing those kinds of things day after day, or maybe one of somebody else's, experience really touches something for you, and you lose touch a little bit with that part of yourself that can sit with that. It can be very difficult. And then we can also then sometimes experience, like you're saying, Jerry, that the structure within that we work as, a betrayal injury as well, when it is not recognized as such. Right. And so when the system, like command systems in the military, don't do well by their soldiers, when they don't do well by the therapist, can also be experienced in that way. And so it's, something I think important, at least in our system, to be recognizing, to help ourselves continue to do the work that we do. I can't speak to what it's like in the private practice world, because I've been within the VA working with veterans for so long. I don't know what it's like out there in that way. And it may or may not be the same, but I think that's important to speak to, Jerry. Thank you for saying so.
And then to your points too, the IFS model to me has been a refuge of sanity, as a place that I could give due diligence to the parts of myself that get activated in session, after session, between sessions, and I now have a facility that's very clear and very gentle and very compassionate, and that can be cognizant of the need for the healer's healing. And IFS is a really, really great model to continue to help remind the healer, and that healing in the healer is the primary source of healing for the client. And IFS is so well situated to that, which would impact burnout dramatically.
Absolutely.
You show up differently.
Yeah. And there's a comment here from Karen about, the parts that are being carried, not exactly fear, but dread, horror, that is exiled, from our shared humanity. And could it be the larger society's refusal to shoulder up that, which isolates the warrior returning from moral injury? And I would say to myself, to that, absolutely. I think that is a component that we miss. Again, when we're talking about missing things, is a community sharing what we have sent people off to do. In our, First Nations cultures, in many of their cultures, they would do that. They would bring their warriors home, and they would shoulder that with them through community, and then help them heal in community. And I think that is one of the things that we are not doing as well either. But I think, to be thinking about how to do that within the community. So the community of therapists, maybe the community in the, in the spiritual aspects and religion and those kinds of places. And then even in community and how we see ourselves in that is an important aspect of that.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. And that's so crucial, I think, to just the witnessing as a community. So that brings us to, I think, Stu, we were talking about groups, like group therapy. To me would be like the first rung of a ladder that climbs out of a hole. That if I can be witnessed in a homogeneous type of group with a shared history of suffering, there's no greater power than that, a communal witnessing of the vulnerability of my articulation, of a deep suffering that I've held private for so long, because of the belief that nobody would understand, and the aloneness in the holding of that pain is primarily the trauma.
Mhm.
Trauma, but there's the holding it alone
Exactly.
as adults, and
Excellent.
particularly as adult males, where there's not permission, and more specifically with the uniformed males. So we have found, like the last 5 years, we have conducted a study at Brooke Army Medical Center, submitting trying to target, can we get more experiential in our approach to group therapy, where we bring the past present in the here and now and work with it in group to open up the vulnerability. And as that vulnerability opens up with one service member in that group, so the connection intrapsychically that happens there is a powerful connector for a group process to move into vulnerability. And I really like the idea that really recovering from trauma is primarily about recovering the capacity for vulnerability. That's really recovery. And group community is a necessary component of that recovery. We have missed that in our medicalized system of care. It has totally taken us away and uprooted us from the core of what we're really about as relational human beings.
I couldn't agree more, and I got to throw in here. So I remember one night, and it was in a vet center group, and the vet centers run a lot of groups. They're groups, not classes, that's a distinction. They're very different. Some guy talked about, he was on a crew that was dragging the Mekong River for bodies, and they brought up a body that he thought he recognized as a friend of his. And that opened up a huge amount of sadness in the group, and other people talked about equally horrific things that had happened to them. We changed none of it for anybody, but what did happen was the whole group was in an atmosphere of love and compassion and caring. So I thought Sharisa did some of that with us, especially, here today, where you have this terrible, horrible experience, but now it's in a context of love and appreciation for other people and connection, and a genuine sadness about the whole human condition, if you will. That's different. That changes things, and I totally agree. We need more of that. So we only have a couple minutes left. I don't know if you guys want to make any kind of closing statements. You don't have to, but if you have something, we got, I think, 3 minutes.
I would just like to commend the incredible work that's been done in the trenches out there with the providers, with all providers in this arena. There's a lot of work being done under very, very burdensome conditions, and I appreciate what's happening out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, as do I. For those of you who are out there and not out there maybe on your own, hopefully that even having this discussion maybe helps you feel as part of a community, even within the IFS community or within the community who treats veterans, that you're feeling some of that, because I think it's important, Jerry, right, to do that. So thank you to all of you who are out there doing that. Thank you to Stu and Jerry for what you do and for inviting me to be part of this discussion. And I appreciate that.
Yeah, and thank you too, Kristen. And I echo the appreciation for people in the audience and the two of you. And I would say one other thing, it's especially rewarding for me to sit down with really a group of spiritually oriented people as well. And we didn't say a whole lot about that today. Maybe we will next time, but I'm very aware there's probably 4,000 years of experience regarding this central concept of IFS, of the self. There's nothing new in the world about that. And people have been trying to talk about it in one way or another forever. And I'm one of the big reasons I picked up this particular orientation is because there's plenty of room for it, you know, and there's an appreciation and devotion to trying to help us develop, you know, what in IFS terms is called the self. There's a lot of other words for that, mostly from theological reference points. But anyway, I just want to comment on that as well. And thank all of you guys for being here. This was cool today, I thought.
Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.